We've got a very eclectic group this week on Low Budget Binge, so let's start binging. Welcome back to ML Miller Frights. I'm ML Miller. Before we begin, please do me a favor and punch that like button down below. Share this video with all of your social media addicted pals. Click subscribe to this channel and ring that bell for notifications. Low Budget Binge is where we venture down the path less traveled and look at low budget, no budget, and sometimes international films that never get that top billing you see with the usual Hollywood fare. I'll indicate in the review down below where you can find these films along with their trailers. Here we go. Bad Ben 6, The Way In, is available streaming on Tubi and from the Bad Ben website. It's directed, written, and starring Nigel Bach. Director and writer Nigel Bach is back as Tom Riley, who this time has been hired to rid the house on Steelmanville Road of its paranormal phenomenon. Tom needs money, so he's willing to risk life and limb to find out why so many demons, monsters, ghosts, and evil baddies are attracted to this specific location. So once again, we're following good old Tom as he pitters around the house and must track down and capture 9 evil entities before finally ridding the house of its evil infestation. It's all about context, and what makes it feasible for Tom to return to this home is spelled out in the opening scrawl, where we're informed the how and the why Tom decides to return. He also mentions it quite a few times in the story. What makes this one different than the previous entries is that it acknowledges that Tom has experienced this before and that, contrary to his reactions to the horror itself, he has seen it all before and says he's not scared of it. Tom has taken these experiences from the unknown and become some kind of warrior against the supernatural, despite the fact that he looks like your neighbor from childhood. What could be seen as a repetitive entry turns out to be quite entertaining because Tom has walked through this house many, many times before. Tom discovers new rooms, encounters new terrors, and finds himself ill-prepared for what the house has in store for him. There are some solid jump scares throughout The Way In, as Bach has developed quite a keen eye for building tension. There are also quite a few quality comedy bits that play out marvelously. I found myself laughing at this one more than previous entries. Bach definitely has improved with each entry by the way of setting up a scare and a joke. It's really impressive. Once again, things work up to a punchline in the final act that really isn't the smartest thing for Tom Riley to do, but what can you do? This series teeters on being a serious horror story and a spoof of the found footage genre and itself, so I can't get too mad at it. This installment actually incorporates some rudimentary CG, which is fun to see as Bach expands his repertoire. It's still hokey, it's still hammy, it's still some dude walking in circles around his house with the occasional jump scare and spooky scene, but damn it, this series really has kept on delivering the goods with the occasional stumble along the way. It's not perfect, but it's still fun. Next week, Tom takes it to the road in The Haunted Highway. See you then. Expiation is new on special edition Blu-ray from Unearthed Films. It's directed by Domiziano, Cristopharo, and written by Andrea Cavaletto. A man, played by Emmanuel Delia, wakes up in a decrepit building, tied to a chair and gagged. In front of him is an attractive woman, played by Karen Lynn, who instructs a drug addict, played by Chris Mielewski, to torture him for her. The addict continues to do so, and as the heinous torture unfolds, we find out the story that brings these 3 people together. Right off the bat, I want to warn you, Expiation is the epitome of a torture porn film. It's literally a man strapped to a chair being tortured. I know that will turn off a lot of people, myself usually included, but I also know that this is a corner of horror that exists because there are fans. No judgment here. If you dig this, that's cool. But when I'm reviewing Unearthed Films, I find it important to let folks know what they're getting into. Expiation is a creative way of spelling expiation, or the act of making amends and reparation for guilt or wrongdoing. It's atonement. And that's what this story is all about. What surprised me with Expiation is that there is a very strong story at play here. The interesting aspects is that while these 3 people are presented it isn't made clear as to who the protagonist is. Who are we supposed to sympathize with? Who was wronged? Who do we root for? We open with the torture, so one might imagine the guy in the chair is the person to relate to. But is he? What I liked about this film is that it kept things ambiguous, and the more the backstory is revealed, the more things get very complicated. What attracts some folks to films like Expiation is the effects and the gore. It's toe-curlingly potent here, as steel wool, a hot iron, and various other tools are used to dismantle the man in the chair to his most basic parts. For the most part, the effects are convincing. It made me wince, especially when it's made clear that a bit of time has passed between one stage of the torture to the next. It's convincing. It's not over the top, but it's going to make you wince. But aside from the realistic effects and gore, which all of these types of films often excel at, Expiation is more of a metaphorical film than most films of its kind. It delves into the psyche of the characters. There are characters that represent moods, feelings, and personal demons. There are scenes where the addict is torturing the man in the chair, but later we see this may not be the case as the veil is pulled up a little to reveal he may be doing something completely different. The final reveal really plays up this aspect, but I won't reveal exactly what it is here. If you're brave, you might want to experience it for yourself, as Expiation is much deeper than one would expect. Take Back the Night is new this week in select theaters, on demand, and digital download from Dark Sky Films. It's directed by Elliott and written by Elliott and Emma Fitzpatrick. After being attacked by a monster after an art show, party girl Jane, played by Emma Fitzpatrick, goes on a long road to recovery and vows revenge against the beast. But Jane's biggest challenge is convincing others that the monster actually exists. Take Back the Night is a mature and thoughtful take on, sadly, all too common subject matter, namely separating the victim of a crime from the character of that person. It's not as much about rape and violent crime itself, though it does play a major part of the story. More so, it's about one person's journey to recovery that doesn't necessarily fit the template of what a victim should look and act like. Jane is a bold party girl who is very concerned about her online social presence. She barely takes a break after her attack and decides to press on, most likely before she really should. Shucking the advice of the police officer investing the case and her own sister, she doesn't seek out therapy, she just tries to go on with her life. This doesn't match the quivering victim everyone thinks someone should be after a violent crime, and that bothers quite a few people that satellite her, some to the point of claiming she faked the crime in order to gain social media status. This subject matter is dealt with in an even and confident hand, communicating the complex message extremely well. At the same time, Take Back the Night wants to be a monster movie. At first, I thought the monster was going to be a metaphor, because the events of Jane's attack are hazy due to the fact that she wasn't sober and she received a head injury. She viewed her attacker as a cloudy, formless creature with dirty fingers and sharp teeth. It's a striking image. I thought what was going to happen was that the monster would increasingly take shape, and by the end, it would be an actual human being who attacked her as Jane's memory got clearer. Instead, Take Back the Night leans full force into the monster idea. It truly is a monster, one who has attacked many women and scarred them deeply. As the story goes on, this becomes a tale of someone trying to convince the world that the monster exists. It becomes less of a personal tale about self-discovery, with Jane realizing that her lifestyle might have been putting herself into danger, and more about the blame towards an exterior force. I'm not trying to judge Jane for her lifestyle, but sleeping with randos in the bathroom at a party and then walking alone and drunk down a dark alley really doesn't show good decision-making skills on her part. Focusing the blame on the attacker is valid, but one might also acknowledge mistakes made in order to avoid this problem again. But Jane doesn't do that. Instead, she gets more reckless, going right back out there alone into another dark alley, seemingly the next night after her attack, seeking out this supernatural monster as a personal quest to prove she is not lying. These are all actions that put herself into further danger. She wasn't asking for it, but instead of learning from her mistakes, she doubles down in order to prove she is right. This is an interesting angle to approach the subject matter, but moves a vast distance from being a cautionary tale and more of a tale of a righteous knight on a futile quest. The result is Take Back the Night being an uneven and schizophrenic movie. It feels like it doesn't know what it wants to be. The first half feels like it wants to be a psychological thriller, but then it turns into a full-force monster fantasy. And by doing so, this undercuts the message of empowerment and responsibility that it felt like it was going for in the beginning. Points for being unpredictable, but this film feels like the first and second halves were made from two different drafts of a script written by two completely different writers. The acting is strong. Emma Fitzpatrick, who I interviewed years ago when she starred in The Collection, the sequel to The Collector, gives a powerful leading performance, as does The Midnight Swim's Jennifer LaFleur, as a tough cop who wants to believe Jane, even when all the evidence tells her not to. Angela Gullner also is strong here as Jane's more responsible sister, who is baffled at her sister's recklessness. Across the board, Take Back the Night is a powerfully acted film, just one that seems to get lost in what message it's trying to tell by the end of it all. A Banquet is new in select theaters, on demand and digital download from IFC Midnight. It's directed by Ruth Paxton and written by Justin Boll. Holly, played by Sienna Guillory, lives a comfortable life as a single mother of two teenage girls. Younger sister Isabel, played by Ruby Stokes, and older sis Betsy, played by Jessica Alexander. Both seem to be healthy and happy, but after a strange encounter in the woods during a party, Betsy passes out and suddenly just stops eating. Though she seems to feel fine, Betsy describes her symptoms as simply feeling a numbness and disconnect from her body, and a looming revelation that something apocalyptic is coming. While it deals with horrifying elements, I struggle to call A Banquet a horror movie. It's more of a dark drama, focusing on eating disorders and how it affects not only those with them, but those around them. Across the board, the film is well acted. Sienna Guillory does a fantastic job as the mother, who is simply grasping at straws in hopes to find some kind of cure for her daughter's ailment. She shifts from rage to resentment to compromise to hopelessness effortlessly and often throughout the story, and while the focus is on Betsy's problem, much of the story focuses on how difficult it is watching this go on from outside of any rational understanding. It's frustrating to see someone simply throwing their life away because of some kind of delusion. In this case, though, it's made clear as to whether something insidious is going on or if it's something simply made up in Betsy's head. Jessica Alexander does a fantastic job as Betsy. She doesn't completely understand what's going on and wants to find a cure for what's happening, but simply cannot eat. The thing is, she isn't losing weight or really showing any side effects. The seemingly supernatural angle really does make you question what is going on here, and it kept me interested in the story all the way through, even though it relies on drama to propel it rather than scary and gory scenes. Much of the conflict is featured in a dreamlike way as Betsy is falling apart mentally, juxtaposed against the pristine and privileged home with a caring family around her. Alexander really communicates that stuck between a rock and a hard place feel where she wants to ease her family's tension but doesn't know how. Other exemplary performances come from the youngest sister, Isabel, played by Ruby Stokes, who acts out and seems to be going down the same path simply because Betsy is getting all of the attention. And Lindsay Duncan is fantastic as the grandma who thinks she sees through the facade and attempts to threaten Betsy out of her funk. The way all of these characters interact with Betsy really does reflect the spectrum of reactions one has with dealing with eating disorders or any other kind of mental illness in wonderfully realistic ways. That said, I found the final moments, where some answers are given, to be unsatisfying. There's a late-in-the-game revelation about Betsy's weight loss, or lack thereof, that's too subtle and completely unclear. The final scene reminded me of the shocking last second of Saint Maud, but A Banquet doesn't communicate its message as clear as it could have, so the impact is much less potent. Because it seems to want a more subtle ending and not provide answers, it makes for a vague message sent. It's undeniable that there's plenty of talent in front of and behind the camera with A Banquet, but by the time the credits rolled, I felt as if a lot of it was undercut with its ethereal message and ambiguous end. Finally, we have Sweetie, You Won't Believe It. It's new on demand and digital download from 101 Films. It's directed by Ernar Nurgaliev and written by Zhandos Aibassov, Yernar Nurgaliev, and Daniyar Soltanbayev. From Kazakhstan comes a rowdy, gory comedy of errors translated to Sweetie, You Won't Believe It. Reminiscent of other iconic international films like Rabies and Why Don't You Just Die, Sweetie, You Won't Believe It is a hodgepodge of comedy, horror, action, and sheer lunacy. It follows the cause and effect style of a Pulp Fiction where different groups collide with gory and hilarious results, and somehow a story is made out of these multiple collisions. Dastan, played by Daniyar Alshinov, is a mild-mannered husband doing his best at satiating his very pregnant and nagging wife, Zana, played by Asel Kalyeva. In need of a much-deserved break, he decides to go on a fishing trip with his two best buddies, Arman, played by Azamat Marglinov, a sex toy salesman, and Murat, Erlan Primbetov, a school security guard. So they take off in a van that looks a lot like the one from Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I don't know if this is purposeful or just the only van they had around, and they witness a crime by a gang of bumbling criminals. Soon the criminals are on their tails, but someone even more deadly is tracking down the criminals because they shot his dog. It all becomes quite messy, but easy to follow as one group of bumbling idiots crashes chaotically into another until only a few are left standing. Watching Sweetie, You Won't Believe It is like watching a modern-day Three Stooges film, but with tons of blood and gore. This is slapstick horror at its finest, where heads explode, body parts fly through the air, and blood gets spattered on and in just about everything. One of the criminals faints at the sight of blood, and let's just say he faints a lot. There are twisted sight gags, over-the-top reactions, cartoonishly weird characters, and under-the-belt humor galore, and it's downright glorious to behold. The true highlight is the scarred-faced killer out for revenge for his fallen pooch. The carnage he orchestrates puts most 80s slashers to shame. If you're looking for a film that is utterly unpredictable and undeniably funny as it sloshes through the blood and gore, Sweetie, You Won't Believe It is it. Expect broken jaws, fish-hooked ears, tiny farts, screaming severed heads, fantastic music, and a wall of baby dolls. This film is made up of bits and pieces of so many great films, including John Wick, The Hangover, and surprisingly Australia's The Loved Ones, but still shines as a completely original entity on its own. Sweetie, You Won't Believe It is my kind of wrong in so many of the right ways. Its direction is crisp, the pace is relentless, the comedy is gold with every beat. Sweetie, You Won't Believe It won't disappoint. It's the type of film that makes me excited to have watched it so I can recommend it to as many people as I can. Enough praise already. Just go watch it.
You're doomed to live the life you're meant to be, stuck inside your reality. You're doomed. Oh, you're doomed. You're doomed. You're doomed. Live the life that you are meant to be. Live inside